help change hearts and minds. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lizette, another great show is in the making, and I know that because we've got an amazing guest waiting in the wings.
I'm so excited, Stephen. We're going to be interviewing John-Peter Wilhite. I cannot wait.
That's right. So everyone, welcome once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started.
Let's do this.
Lizette, what has been going on with you? Talk to me.
Well, summer's here, and it's been 100+ degrees in Arizona, Stephen. I need you to know
Stop.
that we haven't even hit July and August, which
Stop.
are just going to be the worst. Yeah. So I've just been drinking water, lots of water. Jose and I have been in summertime mode apparently. So I'm super tired today because we've been binge watching all the True Detectives. Don't ask me why, but we're watching all the murders, all the investigation. And then Daniel started working with us, and he's going to be working at a summer camp. And he's so excited about earning racks, as he says. And I'm helping plan some pride events in our area. I can't wait. But I do have to tell you. So I had dinner with some college friends, and I'm still friends with most of them. But it was just interesting. It's always interesting to me. And I know that you experience this too, when we have to code switch back and forth around our kids because they just don't get it. And so, and if I vent about it, they're acting like I'm crazy.
Yeah, you got to be really careful about who you share what with, because the old friend that you had is not necessarily the current friend that you have. And so that time and distance often creates responses that you're not necessarily prepared for.
Or they just don't understand why they have to care. You know what I mean?
Yes.
We had at the end of the night, we had this conversation around we've been friends for so many years and all this stuff. And I'm friends connected through nostalgia and people who are actively involved in your life today are two different things. You know what I mean? And how we show up for one another really dictates whether we're close friends or not. It was interesting, but I'm always always hitting that bar with people. I find it fascinating that people think it's normal to have biased ideas about people based on their sex and their gender.
It's a trip, to be sure. And it's interesting because I recently had a friend that I thought was completely out of their minds in terms of where they fell in terms of LGBTQ plus support, who recently reached out because they wanted to introduce me to Lady Portia.
Oh.
Exactly. And I'm for those of you who do not know who Lady Portia is, she is a celebrity in the LGBTQ plus community. She's been featured on HBO and in the Whitney Museum, and she's a diva, to say the least. But this person who sent me her information was the last person I would have expected to have done so. So I get it about friends not necessarily being who you need them to be, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I don't know. We got that sorority connection, we've been friends for 20+ years, but it's hard. But enough about me. Let's hear all that you've been up to.
Well, I can tell you that I too have been on a binge experience. Partner and I are watching Bridgerton season 3, and it's
no.
Scandalous, Lisette, scandalous. It's so scandalous that at times watching it, my butthole is puckered because I'm so nervous.
It's just too risque for you?
Just the stuff that's happening is just too much for me to tolerate. I mean, aside from the costumes being so over the top and just everything being so over the top of Bridgerton, which I love, the actual scenarios that the characters are in is just so stressful. It's so stressful. And now I've got to wait another 2 weeks before the second half of the season is available. What the hell is that? Why are they doing that? That's torture. It's torture.
I've only watched season 1, and I watched it with my mom and Daniel in lockdown. And so it was stressful when certain scenes came on because it was not what I expected from Shonda Rhimes.
Yes. And we met Shonda, so we have a certain connection to to the Bridgerton experience and to Queen. So, but let's not brag about our connections. Okay. Our
Let's
listeners
not.
don't care about that. Okay, so past binging Bridgerton, Memorial Day weekend, I thought I was gonna have a relaxing weekend. No, I did not have a relaxing weekend. I was flitting about New Jersey, taking Fuji to all kinds of soccer tournaments. They won the tournament, which was great. Fuji had a couple goals. He had a banger. Lizette, when I tell you this kid had a banger, he had a banger. He took a corner kick, went past the goal. Another kid played it in across the goal, off the half volley, cracked it into the net. It was so fast and so amazing that I missed it. Another parent caught it and sent it to me. I was so very happy. It was just one of those goals that had me losing my mind. So
Amazing.
yeah. And then obviously this is graduation season. So we just got back from Maryland for Asha Ming's graduation from Johns Hopkins. She got a psychology degree. It was very nice. Mitt Romney was the commencement speaker. I wish I were making this up. I don't know who decided that old ass Utah or Massachusetts, Mitt Romney was the appropriate commencement speaker for Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. He had nothing to say outside of China is our enemy. Russia is our enemy. Communism is, he was talking as if this was the 1960s and these were a bunch of kids who were going off to war. Tone deaf than a motherfucker. It was so bad that the class stood up and turned their backs on him as he delivered his commencement speech. That's how bad it was. The only thing that made it better was that they gave Stevie Wonder an honorary degree. Stevie was there and Stevie played for us. And so he was able to wash the stank taste of Mitt Romney's comments from our mouths with his melodious singing and playing. So that was nice. That was nice.
I mean, I love Stevie Wonder, and I'm also sad about his viewpoints on LGBTQ people.
So I'm not
But
familiar.
it makes him, I know, it's like Santana. Like they say it and then they're like, it's just like, I'll have to find an article for you. But yeah, he's made some comments where you're just like bummed out.
Okay, so then I'm not happy about having listened to Stevie play.
He's an icon. Like, how
It
can we
doesn't matter.
not?
It's
It's
like
like Santana. They're
it's like
icons.
Bill Cosby. It's like R. Kelly. It's like when people do things that are just foul and wrong, yeah, they can be who they were. They can be the icons and the amazing musicians. But if your personal views, if your personal behaviors, if your predilections are foul, you're foul. And I can't rock with you. And I'm just saying, it's okay. I've made peace with the fact that I just can't be down with everybody.
I mean, I just always think like, how do we give them resources?
Sure. Absolutely. There are certain people that we aren't going to get to, and that's what this show is for.
That's right.
Stevie will hear this podcast and be like, damn, I'm going to change my ways because Lizette and Steven think I'm foul.
Yeah, he can remake, like, he can, instead of saying, isn't she lovely, he can remake, like, aren't they lovely?
Talk about it, Lizette.
Yes. Okay. All right.
We could do this all day, but we got to get to today's topics.
Let's do it.
All right, I have to start with this because this got me so excited when I read it. Dwyane and Zaya Wade launched Translatable, a nonprofit online community dedicated to supporting transgender youth. During a recent visit to South Florida, NBA legend Dwyane Wade detailed his latest business venture while receiving the Elevate Prize Catalyst Award during the foundation's Make Good Famous Summit. Now, Translatable, which is funded by the Wade Family Foundation, has one hope for the new online platform, and that is to provide a community that will support growth, mental health, and well-being, and that's a space that ignites more conversations leading to greater understanding and acceptance of the trans community.
I think that this is a wonderful opportunity for them to reach families of color, which Wade stated is at the center of why they started this organization. And I can't wait to see what they do with it.
So, D Wade, if you're listening, I will happily come on to the Why, your podcast, and talk about this latest venture because, of course, you're the executive producer of my film, The Dads. And it would be great for us to have a conversation about one Black dad to another Black dad about what it's like raising Black transgender children in America KKK. What do you think?
I mean, I hope he's listening and has you on his podcast. It's a
Here
must.
we go.
It's going to happen. In a major win for queer inclusion in public education, an appeals court in Maryland just ruled that religious parents don't automatically have the right to pull their children out of an LGBTQIA lesson just because they disagree with the curriculum. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Maryland parents who objected to the inclusion of LGBTQIA texts in their school's curriculum without an opt-out option. Writing for the majority, Judge Agee said, "There's no evidence at present that the board's decision not to permit opt-out compels the parents of their children to change their religious beliefs or conduct, either at school or elsewhere."
What's so funny about rulings like this is that parents think that they somehow have the right to dictate what the school teaches. Like, for time immemorial, school curriculums have been based on what educators, what professionals think is appropriate to be taught to children at their respective ages. And this whole time, we've been teaching the birds and the bees. But the birds and the bees now includes cross-pollination. It includes a broader understanding of human anatomy and sexuality, gender identity, and things that we did not know in the past. And so, if your inability to get with the times means that you don't think children should be taught certain things in school, maybe you need to go back to school.
And it's also things like Walt Whitman, right? Like, what is queer? What is, like, a raisin in the sun? Like, what is, like, these were written by queer poets and writers and people of their time, and our children should read their work. It gives a different perspective and viewpoint of the world. That often has nothing to do with sexuality, but rather an intersectional experience, right? So, yeah, I hear you on that.
All of that. I love this next story that I saw in Pink News. A conservative blogger has been ordered to pay more than $1 million in damages after defaming a drag queen online. Eric Posey, who performs as Mona Lisa Million, won his claim against blogger Summer Bushnell after she posted a doctored video which showed the drag artist at an event in Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. The edited video, which was shared across social media, showed Posey dancing during a performance in June 2022, but was doctored to blur out his pelvic area to make it seem as if he had exposed himself. And when she posted it, she posted comments about how was no one arresting this man who has his junk out and for all people to see, even though she knew that she had doctored the video and posted a doctored video to create this fake outrage.
I mean, finally, right? Like, we're talking about years of like no oversight online for far right people who are targeting and doxing LGBTQIA people. I love seeing this. I think it's really important, and more people should be held accountable for the false information they put online.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm curious though, with the advent of AI and the ease with which people can create deepfakes, how this will play itself out in the future.
I don't know. It's a whole other can of worms that you've just opened. In other news, have you heard about the Missouri Attorney General investigating providers of gender affirming care to youth? The Missouri Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, is seeking redacted or lightly redacted medical records of patients who received care at the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital. The move left the state's trans and healthcare communities with concern over future access to gender affirming care for transgender youth in the state.
This is just like what happened in Texas, where, you've got this overzealous attorney general demanding records pursuant to some investigation that has just tentacles going into places and spaces that it shouldn't. Like, these attorney generals are taking their powers of investigation way too far, and they're specifically targeting transgender youth and facilities that provide services to transgender youth with this specific intention of chilling those medical centers and providers from being able to do their work, because nobody wants to run afoul of an investigation or an attorney general and the potential consequences that flow from it. And again, these institutions are notoriously risk and liability averse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these attorney generals definitely know how to intimidate, which is really, really frustrating.
All right, enough with today's topics. We've got to get to our guest.
Let's do it.
John-Peter Wilhite is the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access for Housing at the University of Arizona. Prior to joining the university, John-Peter was with the Social Venture Partners Tucson as the Director of Donor Engagement. John-Peter served as the Tucson Museum of Art Board of Trustee, chaired the museum's Community Initiatives Committee, and was a key stakeholder in the development of TMA's 2020-2024 strategic plan. John-Peter earned a BFA in Fashion and Art from the Pratt Institute and an MA in Communication Studies from Texas State University. John-Peter is the 2024 recipient of the Tucson Museum of Art and Historic Block Lifetime Achievement Award for their tireless work towards the advancement of the arts. John-Peter's passion focuses on creating inclusive environments that encourage the positive development and success of all people. Everyone, please welcome John-Peter Wilhite to our show.
Oh, we're so happy you could be here with us today.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Lizette.
So we're going to jump right in. John-Peter, you have had what can only be described as a remarkable career in advocacy and nonprofit work, spanning over 30 years, from your early years in ACT UP to your current position as the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access in Housing at the University of Arizona. What do you think has been the biggest life lesson you've learned along the way?
So I love this question, and thank you so much for asking this. The biggest life lesson for me has been learning to take care of me. When I started doing this work, I was really much more external, meaning it was all about what I did out here. And I started falling apart and didn't know how to take care of me. And so it took, and I'll say this, it took having a nervous breakdown to realize if I don't take care of myself, I will never be able to do this work. So yeah, so that was my biggest lesson.
I want to expand on that. I mean, I sent you a bunch of questions, but this actually came up in another interview we did with another community member around how BIPOC communities really center action as a form of love language, right? Like this, I got you, I'm going to do it, I'm going to show up. It's how we cook for our families and clean and keep each other cared for. What were some of the parameters that you added for yourself when you needed to really kind of rebuild from that breakdown to ensure that you had those boundaries in place?
I think the first thing I had to know, I had to teach myself, was that no was an option. That even though it's a word that only has two symbols, it's actually an option that I can lean into. And there's nothing wrong with saying no. Meaning, if someone is struggling because I go, right now, no, I can't do that, that is on them, not on me. If I know I'm in a space that I can't do it, no is an option. So that was one. The second thing for me was thinking about being clear about what I needed. Do I need the support of a good friend right now to talk to about this? Do I think this is sort of a mental health thing I'm navigating and maybe I want to talk to a therapist around it? Really getting an understanding of what it is I needed in that moment that would help me take care of myself and move forward more effectively.
I love that. I always love learning from you and hearing about your life. We still have to schedule a dinner, but I want you to tell us about younger John-Peter. What were some of those moments that really shaped you and led to your later work in advocacy?
So, believe it or not, when I was in elementary and middle school, I had two good friends. Their names were Joe and Joey. And Joey was the first one to ask me about being queer at that time. And we had this long phone conversation. This was back in the early 1970s. This was right after Stonewall. We stuck with each other and stayed friends all through middle school and high school. Very connected. We took a lot of classes together. And at that time, a lot of what kind of helped me be a stronger person was I wasn't afraid to be their friend. There were a lot of people who basically shunned them. I mean, again, keep in mind, I'm talking 1970 to about 1977, right? In this country. And I wasn't afraid to be their friend. And I wanted everyone to know that I was their friend and I was connected to them. I wrote a number of papers that were really controversial about being homosexual during that time frame. And teachers would go, "Why are you writing that paper?" And I'm like, "Because it's an important issue and it's coming up in the world now. So I'm going to write about it." So I just was willing to just do and say things. Like I didn't have parameters on me. I just said it and did it because I really believed in it. It sort of led me into role of advocacy as I moved into college and then got out of college.
I love that so much because it's very rare that people can recall that moment, that spark to stand up for other people and to stand alongside other people was generated? What was the catalyst? So
Yeah.
often we can think to the fact that we are today in the space where we call ourselves allies and we call ourselves advocates. But when did that start? When did you find that spark? And it's interesting that you were aware of that spark at a very early age, which brings me to my next question, because intersectionality is really at the core of our podcast and at the core of your work in DEIA. What do you think were some of the earliest challenges that you faced? And have you seen significant changes in the movement work and storytelling?
I'm going to say this to start this conversation. I haven't seen the changes that I would have liked to have seen. And one of the things that I have not seen change, and I'm really glad you talk on intersectionality, is the reason ACT UP fell apart is because we were not able to bring our whole selves into the space. There was this push for all of us to be in the same box and always in agreement on how we're going to do this work to fight for HIV and AIDS, right? And as ACT UP grew, and we would have meetings where hundreds of us would be in the same room trying to come to consensus on an issue, and everybody would get mad because we couldn't get a consensus, right? At that time, I don't think we all realized it's because we all believed strongly in what we were fighting for, but we had different lenses as how to come to it. And because of those different lenses, we were not going to get consensus, which meant we constantly, and I literally mean constantly, with ACT UP across the country, we were in struggles. It was really tough. It's because we never allowed for people to bring their whole selves in the room and understand the different lenses we might all bring to this, which would mean we could use different approaches through the struggle, right? We didn't have to use a boxed approach to the struggle. Yet, we always used a boxed approach. It was always the same.
I love that you bring this up because it's one of my biggest frustrations when we're talking about movement work. There's this fixation with right-leaning Christians and wanting to change their minds. And I'm like, but there's so much more we can do. There's so many other communities we can connect to and so much that we can learn from past movements. One of my favorite conversations you and I had, and if I have it wrong, please tell me, but like you grew up in Ohio and you were like, Lizette, it was hard.
Indiana.
Like Indiana.
Yeah.
You. Indiana. And you were like, Lizette, it was hard. It was hard to be a young Black queer child in Indiana. I remember you telling me so much of your upbringing, the supports you had shaped who you were in the movement. And yet you were always contending to be heard. You were always contending to be seen fully in the movement work that you were doing. What are some pieces of advice you can give to people who are in the larger movement, who are wanting to bring their whole selves and bring creative ways of communicating and message building and shaping conversations on political debates we're facing today?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is don't be afraid to be someone who is going to just sit back and listen for a while so you can hear the various stories that are coming at you. And after you feel like you've heard enough of the stories, know when it's time for you to lend your voice, meaning what I would say is lean into the conversation a little more. I've seen a lot of people do this. They jump into the cause and they're going to lean in immediately when they don't know what all the issues are, versus the way I operate is if I agree to do it with you, I'm going to be quiet for a while. I'm going to take a lot of information in and I'm tracking it. But there will come a time where my voice is going to be heard. And I make sure my voice is heard in a way that is coming from a place of being, I've educated myself about where we are, what we're doing, and why we are doing it. And I'm going to come up with suggestions based on, I hear that, but I think I have another way we can do this. And let me explain it to you. And let me explain why I'm pushing this issue based on, and I base it on what I've heard. So that ability to be an active listener, but then making sure that you've given yourself enough of the information you need to be strong on your conviction in putting your issue forward. Now, the caveat to that is, even if we're strong enough and we know how to do that, there's always that chance our team won't move forward with that, and we have to be okay with it.
You raised a very interesting point about being okay when folks don't agree with you, because I know I'm a stubborn person. I'm a Taurus with a Taurus rising or whatever, and so when I dig in, I really dig in. But I do what you say first. I sit and I listen and I observe and I take it all in, because you don't want to be the new kid on the block suddenly with all the ideas that no one has ever heard before. You lose all credibility. But at the same time, if you take take the time to do your due diligence, to educate yourself on the issue, look at a myriad of perspectives, and then you don't have your voice heard, it's very difficult. But what I've learned is that we cishet people need to stop centering ourselves in movement work. We need to stop thinking that we know so much simply because we have the perspective. It's like what you were saying was happening in Act Up. You were trying to act as a monolith and you were all different people. And we have to stop thinking that we know best, even if we know a lot. In this space of DEIA, where we're seeing this backlash against what we know to be fact, diversity improves insert thing here, but we find ourselves at critical point in this country's history where DEI is the boogeyman for everything. How do you work in this space knowing that DEI is the thing that has the target on its back?
Yeah, a lot of it for me is I have a really strong understanding of language. So, as you read in my bio, my master's is in human communication. What that means is I did tons of research on the fact that we use words every day. When we verbally talk to each other, when we write stuff, I understand the impact that language has on people. So, thinking about that, it is like the forefront of everything that I do. So, when I think about doing the work that I do now, and right now, we've got all these terms: inclusion, diversity, equity, access, justice, racial justice, and the list goes on, right? Belonging is another one that's in there. These are all hot button words to the vast majority of society. What we're trying to do is shift our culture and our cultural thinking and the way we treat each other as a culture. That's what we're looking for. That is the real focus of this work, right? And so a lot of where I come from in my work is I stay away from, when I can, the hot button words. And I use language. I can walk into a space, and I've done this. I've walked into spaces where everyone in the room is white and cis. And when I leave after doing my work with them, they all want to give me a hug. They all go, "You just changed my whole world. I never thought about it this way. I never knew I could see it that way. I've always believed this, but I didn't know what the language was that I should be using," right? I give them concrete tools that they can use to begin to uplift themselves as they try to become allies or think they want to become allies. I give them concrete tools, and those tools happen to be words and language that they can use to invite a person into a conversation.
I've seen it in action many a times. The first kind of major meeting that John-Peter and I had together, it was like trial by fire. And I was like, what is happening? And John-Peter was like in the corner, like just like taking it all in. And I was like, oh my God, what did we walk into it was like an all-day conference. Anyway, that's another story for another day. But I do want to ask you this really important question around care. You and I have spoken at length on the toll advocacy can take on our mental health, on our bodies, the trauma that we carry and experience. And for you and I talked a lot about survivor's guilt and the AIDS epidemic having an impact on your body even today. What would you tell your younger self when it comes to taking care of themselves? And what advice do you have for the next generation?
Yeah, I think what I would have told my younger self goes back to something I did say a little earlier, which is put myself first. I never put myself first. Like I said, I lived external from myself, not internal. That would be one thing. The other thing is, I wish I could have helped my younger self know to trust those feelings when they surface, or those internal things that are happening when the body is telling me this is not good. You need to walk away. You're going to punch this person in the face. So it might be time to step away from this, right? No, because usually I just punched is what I did, or I just started cussing is what I did. I didn't know that I could tell myself to do that at that time, that was an option for me. And then the other critical thing that I would do, which I'm really actually still learning how to do this, is develop a network of individuals that I trust, that we believe in each other, and that we're authentic with each other, so that when I need to leave and be messy and ugly about what I did, what I said, or whatever, I can actually call someone and they're going to let me fall apart that way, because I may need to do that, right? I may need to have that bad moment because I was pissed off about something, but I need a trusted partner, and it could be a loved one, it could be a best friend, it could be a family member. It's got to be a trusted individual that allows you to release that, right? Here's what I do in my life now. I'm not in a relationship with someone. I have family members here, but I don't have that kind of connection with them. I have a therapist that I work with, and I have a coach that I work with. They are my trusted partners. And it's often on, I see one of them twice a month and one of them once a month. So So I have individuals that I get to release a lot of that to, and that's what they want me to do. I think it's really important that we help people who want to be advocates, who want to be in the cause, as I call it, that they find that network that really is a strong network for them where they can truly be authentically themselves.
That concept of self-care cannot be overstated, especially in the climate we are in today. As people of color who have lived a certain amount of time on this earth, we are seeing a retrenchment to behaviors and attitudes that we thought we had left well in the past and we're
Yep.
still dealing with today. And so that advice to individuals who are in this space, who are doing the work to take care of yourselves, to find people that can just let you just fall apart and will be there to support you and pick you back up and to brush you off and get you back out there is so important, because I think it's super critical. It's super critical. But it also then brings me to this next question about the parents of LGBTQ plus youth who are in this moment in crisis, who are deathly afraid and worried about their children in today's political climate. What advice do you have for parents who find themselves in this very untenable place?
The first thing I'm going to say is the top priority is to love that child. You have to begin there. They have to know how much you love them. They have to know. It's really critically important. So that's the first thing. And then from that, find ways to really develop trust. And that is not going to be easy. And what I mean by that, part of that trust is trust that your child is telling you what they can tell you in the time that they're telling you. And even though you may know internally you're not getting all the facts, right? Don't go digging unless they ask you to go digging. Just trust that in that moment, I'm telling you what I can tell you right now. And then lastly, to build on that trust, listen. And here's what I mean by listen. Some people listen just to listen. They're just listening and they've already got an answer before you're done. That's one way. Some people actually listen to hear what is actually being said. That means they're going to ask clarifying questions. They're going to check in with you. They're going to determine if we're on the same page, right? That's another form of listening. The top level of listening is you're listening to hear what is not being said. So in building that trust with your child, you'll start noticing maybe you've asked a couple times about a situation that's happening at school and you get the same story. It means you're not asking the right question. I encourage parents to listen a little more, to hear what's not being said. Find that question so that your child then finally says, well, here's what's really going on and what I didn't tell you based on the question you just asked me. We're not taught, we don't learn listening skills when we grow up. No one is taught how to listen. We don't practice it. Every now and then in a workshop, you might get an activity, but we're not taught to listen. Active listening is a skill that has to be developed and encouraged, and we don't do it. And it is critical in the work that we do.
I cannot tell you how much it means to me that you mentioned trust, because when we finally started our gender journey where we were going to support our son Daniel, we found a pediatrician, but then we found a child psychologist who specialized in trans youth. And I remember having long talks with the therapist and telling him, our child doesn't trust you and our child doesn't trust us. And I don't blame him for not trusting us, because we were actively not listening and supporting him. And so we did a whole year of active trust building, where like every session was about building trust between our care, us as parents, and then our care team, our provider. And so I found that that was so important in letting Daniel know that we were here for him and that like we really were committed to supporting him. So I think that that is so critical. I love that you say that. And it like leads me into the next question, where you shared with me how supportive your mother was and that was like so important to you. We know obviously that parental support is key to raising healthy, happy, and thriving kids, especially LGBTQIA kids. What is your favorite affirming memory of your mother?
So I have a couple, but I'll do them quickly.
Share them
The first
all.
Okay, so the first one was when I was living in New York. I just graduated from college, and so my mother comes out to New York with my sister and my brother, and I had my aunts come and like all these family members to go to my graduation. Now, by the time I got to New York, I was really out, and all of my friends were wild, queens, gay boys, right? And so when she met all of those my friends, my mother just fell in love with all of them. She embraced them. She made sure that my sister and brother knew who they were. It was this immediate embracing of the community that I was a part of in New York City. So then a few years later, when my boyfriend and I at the time decided to move to San Francisco, I told my mom we wanted to stop at her house in Michigan because we were driving across. So my first one is when she came to my graduation. So Neil and I are driving across the country to San Francisco, and we stop at my mom's house. And in my mind, I'm thinking my mom is going to put us in two different rooms, right? I've never brought a boyfriend home at that time before. And so we get there, and she's got like our room set up and the bed's made for both of us to be in the same bed. And she had told my sister and brother that I was coming home with my boyfriend. And she just made it a part of like normal life. Like, this is normal that he's coming home with his boyfriend. I didn't find that out until about 2 years ago when my brother and sister were here. I asked my brother and sister, at what point did y'all know, or did mom tell you? And she said, oh, when you came home with Neil, mom told us you were bringing your boyfriend home. So David and I thought that was normal, that people had boyfriends, they had girlfriends, they had boyfriends and girlfriends. We thought that was just normal. So she was always my advocate silently all along the process. She knew well before I did and was always there and always held my back. So I've never had to be anyone but myself with my mom because she's allowed me to be who I need to be without question.
I love that so much.
John-Peter, that's only one story. You said you had a whole bunch. You can't just give us one after saying you got a whole bunch. Give us at least one more. Come on. You hold back on us.
My mom told me a story about, I guess she was in her workplace. Somebody was in her workplace and she got really angry at this person. This person started putting down LGBTQ people at that time. And she tried to stay quiet and finally she could not. And she let the person have it. And she called me that day and she said, I'm so mad. How dare they like judge people like that? I'm not into judgments. I'm not into assessments. We don't have the right. I could tell that she was really, really frustrated. And then the other thing my mother did is, as I started coming out to the family, if a family member would make a comment, my mother shut them down immediately and said, oh, no, you're not going to do that. That is your nephew. That is your cousin. She said, we don't play that game in our family. We love everybody in our family, no matter what. Because I come from a mixed race family, I have a lot of white relatives as well. A lot of my family members have married people from other countries. So we're really a mixed race family. And one of the things my mom always pushed is like, nope, you don't get to judge people. We're here to love people, be kind, and be respectful. And that's all you're going to get to do. So she was never afraid and has never been afraid to kind of call people out on their behaviors and their thoughts.
Good on your mom. She needed to be given master classes on humanity because so much of what's happening in society is that breakdown of just decency.
Yep.
All right. So when I was doing my research on you, I came across a couple of interviews that you did in which you said like the two key elements for creating spaces of care and building community are being self-reflective so you can find your role along the journey and creating an environment where people are willing to lean in to understanding each other as opposed to simply being understood. Can you give our listeners some practical examples that they can use to ensure that they are creating these types of environments in the midst of such misinformation, disinformation, and political turmoil?
Yeah, I'm going to speak to what I have found has worked for me as I started shifting when I did this work. I need to go back to listening. What happens a lot of times is when we are in this, we're jumping into a group and doing advocacy work, we all come with our opinions and immediately want to push our opinions forward. If we leaned out a little bit and began to listen to each other to get a better understanding of who do I have in the room, right? So let's say I'm the person and I'm putting this together and I'm bringing a bunch of people together because we're ready to fight for a certain issue and we're really pissed off. And these 20 people all said they're interested. If I'm facilitating this process, the best way for me to begin the space of self-reflection and better understanding each other is to set it up the first time that we're coming together to know who we all are. We're coming together to know, and I'm going to listen and I'm going to take notes. I'm going to spend some time really understanding. And then from that, helping people understand and laying it out that as a group of people, we're not always going to agree. But what we're going to try to is get to a space where we trust that whatever we decide to do, we can all buy into that process. And we want to make sure all voices are heard. What happens a lot of times is we forget that there are introverts and extroverts on all, committees, teams, or whatever. And the introverts have a tendency to lean out and not lean in. The extroverts lean in. It's on leaders of organizations like that to make sure that space has been created for introverts to have their voice. Because if all of a sudden your introverts are not having their voice, they're going to leave. If I don't feel like I can never speak because I always feel like I'm overwhelmed by what the extroverts say, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to participate. But if some point I've set the space where I'm listening as a facilitator or a leader saying, I want us to pause for a moment. I know that there are several of you in the room that haven't had a chance to speak. I just want to leave that space for you right now to be able to do that. And so what I'm going to ask everyone to do is those of you who speak a lot, I'm going to ask you to be silent just a little bit. And any of you who might feel that there's something that you want to add to the conversation, I want to encourage you, if you feel comfortable enough, to lean in right now and let us hear your voice. So you don't ever call anybody out. Please don't ever put anybody on the spot, but open that space and allow for the silence that needs to happen for introverts or people that tend to be more quiet to speak up.
I'm really curious about this too, because I know you facilitated spaces. Like, for example, at the height of COVID during Black Lives Matter, you were facilitating like multiracial meeting groups, right? To talk about really difficult issues that we were living in. And so oftentimes people either talk past each other. Like I had a trans masculine person say this so beautifully. I really wish the opposition could understand that I know my physical anatomy. And so I understand the body that I am bound to, and that doesn't lessen my experience as a man. I'm a man in this world, but the right seems to think I'm delusional as if I don't know the body I inhabit, right? And so it was really interesting to talk about how we talk past each other. There's all these assumptions being made. The last 5 years have been fraught with these necessary conversations around what does disruption look like when we talk about structural harm. What does disruption look like when we talk about the microaggressions or macroaggressions we cause on each other in communities? Like, what has been the most practical and helpful ways to engage in those conversations that are heavy, that make people feel shame or make people feel defensive? What works in those moments?
So in my experience of those spaces, the facilitation was not very good. And it's usually led by someone who's not aware of, I know that I have people in the room who have divergent ideas about this process. So that means I need to think about how we're going to all operate together. I do not go into any spaces without setting guiding principles of how we're going to work together. So when I go into a space, and the example I'll use is, so I've done a lot of nonprofit board work, and I am always amazed at how many boards that I sit on have no principles of operation that they've agreed to and that they've set up. And let me be really clear. I don't like the word agreed to or agreements, because when we say, oh, does everyone agree in the room? I can guarantee you there's 3 or 4 people in the room that don't agree. So I use the term principles of operation or guiding principles because that means they're flexible and nimble enough that we can change them and update them. So my principles today that I follow, they're probably going to change in 5 years, but I have that ability to update them because they're principles we follow. They're not things that we agree to. So literally I can speak to, in every case where I've been a part of the meeting where somebody else is leading it and we're there to talk about a charged issue and they didn't set some operating principles for us, it got really ugly. And I'm going to give you an example. There was a time here in Tucson, it was coming out of the programs at SAFE after Wingspan was taken over, and they were trying to bring a bunch of people from the LGBTQ community together. There were LGBTQ police officers there, people from nonprofits, people from the business world. They were trying to figure out what it might look like for us to do something now that we don't have Wingspan. And so it was never, in my mind, a process that was facilitated very well. And there were lots of people talking over each other, white gay males as usual, taking over everything in the room. And what happened is there was an instance where white gay male talks about how we need to be a little bit more connected to the police department, and the police department in Tucson is our friend, and kind of going on and on about this, right? So I listened, and they were only 2 or 3 seats down from me. And so finally, when they were done, I said it to the whole room. I said, I need to be very clear in this room. And I think some of you know this. I said, there are members of our community that are not ever going to be comfortable with police in certain circumstances. And we need to have that awareness. This individual then jumps down my throat, right? Immediately jumps down my throat. Well, and says they need to get over it. They're our friends, blah, 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 blah. I almost blew a gasket and had a heart attack. I was so pissed off. And most of that room could tell, since I was one of maybe 2 people of color in a room with 30 people, right? I was fortunate that there was another male across the way, a white male, came to my defense and jumped right down that person's throat. And clearly, and this is what that person said, you clearly did not listen to him, and I would encourage you to listen to him and shut up. So again, and it's because it was a process that was not facilitated well enough where we understood the principles that we were going to operate under, and that it's important that every voice is heard, that there are going to be differences of opinions, and you don't go jumping down somebody's throat because you don't agree with them, right? And you don't get to say to somebody, well, people just need to get over that. No, 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 no. What his response should have been is, oh, thank you for sharing that. I forgot about that, or I didn't understand that. That makes sense to me, versus jumping down my throat and telling me that they should get over it. So that ability to, like, I still think it's important that we go into advocacy spaces where we know we're coming together for an issue, right? But let's get clear about how we're going to navigate this space with each other. Let's get some real clarity on that before we jump right to the issue and start navigating that issue with each other. Because in most cases, we're not prepared to navigate that issue with each other because we haven't done the work.
So on our show, we really try to center the experiences of trans people and their families, always seeking to instill hope. Like, that's ultimately what we hope the Parent Advocate Podcast does, is it gives parents and families hope for their future. What are 3 tips that you can give to parents of trans children to help them instill hope in their children?
Well, let me think about this for a moment, because it's similar to what I said a little earlier with the 3 tips, which I think is important. That I think for a parent, I think what would be critical to start with is, and I can't think of the word, but you've got to embrace them with as much love as you possibly can. You have to start there, because if you don't, if you're not there and they even slightly not felt, you've lost them. I have to be honest with you. That's the first thing, right? Number 2, from that, to build on that, it goes to what Lizette, you were talking about. You went through a year of building trust. So I now know my parent loves me. I'm struggling with what's going on with me, but I don't trust that they really care. So now we're going to build that trust, right? And from building that trust, be prepared to listen. Be prepared to listen, because the listening is going to guide you as that individual is determining what's going on with them and what they may need, right? Because it's going to be different for every trans individual, every LGBTQ person, all of it. If you're not listening so that, oh, you know what? It seems like now is the time we need to talk about this through this process. It seems like my child is ready for that. But you won't know that if you're not listening and you're so wrapped up in your world. And the other thing that I would encourage, that I think with folks from the queer community, the trans community, parents should be willing to, when you're going to have those conversations that you need to have them, please put everything else down. Stop cooking. Don't sew. Don't drive in the car, right? Sit and be present with that child and give them what they need, which is your presence, and not, yes, we can talk, but I'm cooking dinner right now. That doesn't work, right? That doesn't instill trust in me as a child that you care about me. So be very present with them and know when it's time for you to be present with your child and give them all of your attention. And the word I was trying to think about with love is unconditional love. It needs to be completely, there can be no conditions tied to it. It needs to be completely unconditional.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the most pressing challenges and opportunities in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion? What do you see for the future?
I would say my biggest concern is based on a story I heard literally just yesterday, which is an individual who identifies in a marginalized community that has decided that all this inclusion and diversity work is anti-Semitic. And what I mean by that, it's individuals who are, like, for whatever reason, if I'm not speaking specifically to Black Lives Matter when I'm doing my inclusion and diversity work, then it's very anti-Black. If I'm not speaking to LGBTQs, and there are individuals that really believe that, no, you need to highlight us because we're the most marginalized community. We've got to move to a space to understand we have and I'm just going to speak to the United States. I'm not going to talk about the rest of the world. We have a very large population of of marginalized individuals in this country, because we live in a country that was built by white males. It was built by white males. Let's be very clear about that. And they put all the systems in place. And we are still operating under those systems. As we're trying to change those systems, we feel like we need to completely tear them apart and then rebuild. We're not prepared to tear apart and rebuild. Here's what we're prepared to do. We're prepared to look at a system that's not working and course correct it, because it's been going down the wrong lane for a long time. I need to make a right turn now with this system and rewrite it. We have a lot of people that are against that. And so there are these outliers that they're part of the marginalized communities, but going back to ACT UP, they want a box method to do this. Here's the box. We need to jump in the box, and I need everybody to get in the box with me. It's never going to work that way, because we as individuals experience the world very differently than everybody next to us, anybody else that's in our life. It's just who we are. And the more we can create some understanding around that as we're trying to work together and navigate these difficult situations, the more we'll be able to move forward and find lanes that we can all be in, moving toward a similar process. I don't like the word goal. I like process, because that means it's continual. It's not ever going to go away. If we call it a goal to fix the culture, what happens when we get to the goal and we decide we're done? We go back to square one again, right? No. It has to be a process that we constantly are working on, massaging, course correcting, going around a mountain and coming back out. It's a process.
And I mean, I think this is what I love about my conversations with you and other. Daniel tells me never to use elders, but that's the word that he says mentors, because he's like, that's rude to call people old mama, call them mentors. So I'm going to use mentor. But like, these are the conversations that I love to have with you, because you remember a time when police were used against queer people of color.
Columbia University the other day. Oh,
exactly.
sorry.
We're seeing it on our own university, right? Where police are being used. We saw it during Black Lives Matter, when police were being used to uphold a structure that needs to be course corrected because it is causing harm and has continued to. And so we lose, like, I always talk about this. People have short memories. They think that this happened decades ago, and really it happened within my parents' lifetime, right? The harms continue to happen within my own lifetime. And so if we're not hearing voices like yours, John-Peter, we're losing the core lessons that we need to make sure that we're making the decisions to deconstruct or redirect as we move, right? And so I'm just always so grateful for you, and I'm grateful that you were on here, and I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface. You and I talked so much more deeply.
But we only have so much time per episode. But this is the beauty of a podcast. We can always have our guests back. John-Peter, it was an absolute pleasure having you on our show today. I am so looking forward to listening to this episode again and sharing it out with the world, because I think there's so many pearls of wisdom.
You're so welcome. It's been such an honor to share time with you and to be in a space where I could actually share about my experience. Thank you for having me on.
I'm going to share this because Stephen doesn't know, but like John-Peter was like, oh, Lizette, I was 20 years ago, jumping on planes, being propped up on national stages to be the face of things. And here are ways that you can take care of yourself. Because I was talking about like the compartmentalization and my body being tired. And like, it was just so beautiful to hear someone be like, no, I know what that's like. I know the frustration, and let's talk about it. And it's meant the world to me. So
all right, so I'm adding you to my Rolodex, because and I are on the same plane, train, automobile schedule, with people coming and videotaping us and bringing us here and talking us there. And it's a lot. And again, we do it for the cause. We do it for the love of our children. We do it for the love of the community, but it's work. And it's work. Sometimes you need somebody to say, hey, been there, done that. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. And sometimes you just need someone to call and just complain. You do. You need that person that you can say, I think you'll understand this, especially like in that instance where the interview went a direction that you weren't expecting and you couldn't reel that interviewer back in, whether it's radio, on television, or whatever it was. And I've had a lot of those experiences where I'm sitting there going, great, how do I get out of this mess? Because I didn't think they were going to ask those questions, right? And so now it's gone down a lane that I'm not interested in going down, and I'm trying to backtrack us out of that lane. So you leave that scenario being really pissed off at the media and not wanting to do media work because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I adore you.
We're going to start a whole nother interview. John-Peter, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups that are supporting the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lisette, who are we talking about today?
Our ally of the week is the one and only clapback queen and U.S. Congressional Representative from Texas, Jasmine Crockett. During a House hearing on whether to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress, there was a contentious exchange between Green and Crockett, with Green alleging that Crockett was unintelligent and couldn't read through her long eyelashes. Crockett asked Committee Chair James Comer a hypothetical question about his decision on whether to strike Green's words from the official congressional record, asking if someone on the committee then starts talking about somebody's bleach blonde, bad-built butch body, that would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
All I can say is that Jasmine proved that Black women are not to be trifled with when she responded to Marjorie Taylor Greene's disparaging remarks. I can only say that clapback was so hard, I felt it. I felt it, and I bought the t-shirt. I did. Had to go and support her now trademark application applied for clapback because that was just so fierce. You can't come for Black women, especially not ones that are infinitely more intelligent than you are.
And this is why Jasmine Crockett is our ally of the week.
Congratulations to clapback queen Jasmine Crockett. Now on to our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week is Colorado State Republican Director of Special Initiatives, Darcy Schoening. In an email written by Schoening, the Republican Party has called for parents in that state to take their kids out of public schools because Democrats are trying to, and I quote, turn more kids trans, suggesting that the sponsors of a bill supporting LGBTQ plus people in school do not know their own genders when referring to lawmakers Stephanie Vigil, a queer lawmaker, and Brianna Titone, the first out transgender person elected to the Colorado legislature. Schoening complained that the law requires teachers in public schools to use pronouns for kids with gender confusion that do not align with their actual scientific gender without parental consent. Schoening's email also perpetuated the false notion that gender dysphoria among young people is just a fad or something kids do to get back at their parents.
I really hate people like this, Stephen. It's so exhausting. There's so much just misinformed ideas that have come out of one person's mouth that I don't even have like a response. How do we explain to people that contagion is the same bullshit rhetoric that the GOP was using around gay and lesbian people? It's just not real. And so this is ridiculous and I have no words.
And this is why Darcy Schoening is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank today's guest, John-Peter Wilhite, for joining us today. And of course, I got to give it up to my co-host, Lizette Stephen, for being as amazing as she always is.
And thank you, Stephen. You know I couldn't do this without you. And of course, we couldn't do this without all of you, our listeners. Thanks for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do whatever you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast. Bye.
Goodbye.